notice how you stand up on stage, you're about to stand up on stage, or just before you do something really, really big, you kind of get a little bit of stage fright, a little bit of anxiety. You guys notice that? I've noticed that, right? I have this thing that I do whenever I'm about to do something big like that. It's called an anchor. Before I demonstrate it, I'll explain what an anchor is. An anchor is a neurological response to a physical stimuli, which is just a complicated way of saying that our emotions are attached to some of the things that we see in the world. The best example I could think of is Kevin Costner played a pitcher in the twilight of his career in a movie called For the Love of the Game. And he would stand there on the pitcher's mound, and all the fans from the opposing teams would be cheering him and booing him and saying, "Oh, you suck!" And he'd be standing up there, and what he needed to do was be focused on what he had to do. And so what he would do is he'd stand there, he'd put his hands like this, take a breath, and he'd say, "Clear the mechanism," in his mind. All the voices fell away. He became focused on what he needed to do to throw the perfect pitch. That's an anchor. My anchor goes like this. Looks like that. When I want to feel those feelings of connectedness and confidence, you might not see it. Sometimes maybe you've noticed it, but I come up on stage and like that. It kind of looks like packing a can of chewing tobacco, right? That's how I learned it. That's how I learned it. The motion, that is not the anchor. It's not a way to build confidence to chew tobacco. I told my son, I showed it to my son once. The anchor, not the chewing tobacco. But I showed him and he said, "Dad, what's that?" And I said, "Oh, this is my anchor. I do this to become all-powerful." My son was 16. He said, "Well, that's stupid." So I said, "Well, you're stupid." Because that's how you argue with a teenager. You take the last adjective they said and direct it right back at them. So if they say, "That's silly," you're silly. "Well, that's stupid," you're stupid. That's how you argue with a teenager. Argument over. He is, though. Stupid, that is. I got proof, though. So, a little story. Last year, he calls me on the cell phone, and he's in his car, and I can hear metal on metal grinding. And he says, "Dad, I don't know what happened. I was parking, and I bumped into the curb, and now my wheel's all bent. But I'm coming home, and everything's going to be okay." And I said, "Are you sure? It doesn't sound very, very good." He says, yeah, I'll be fine. 10 minutes later, he gets home, and I see him out in the garage. He's pulling in the car into the driveway, and the driver's side front wheel is doing this as he's driving into my driveway. It's going like 30 degrees left and right. The wheel, the metal part of the rim, is so bent that it's rubbing against the brake, the piston, and the brake cylinder and everything. It's rubbing it down to nothing. And he's pulling it in, and his car's doing this. Whatever he hit it so hard, the wheel hit the driver's side door. It went all the way to the metal. It bent the metal. You couldn't even open the door right. And he said, "Dad, it was weird. I don't know what happened." It didn't take but 10 minutes to find out he was drifting. That's where you spin your car around in a circle. In his school parking lot at 60 miles an hour, lost control and hit the curb. That was the real story. Sometimes I just feel like Homer Simpson. That's the quote. I just want to grab him and just want to choke him. "Why, you little..." I don't do that. No, I don't, because every time I look at him, there's a part of me inside that looks back to 17 years ago when we were in the hospital. My wife was in labor with him. And my wife's labor was really quick and intense. It lasted only 45 minutes. And so we're in the hospital, my wife's in full-on labor, and she's holding my hand, and I'm struggling, because she's really strong when she's going through labor pains. And everything was kind of going good. The doctor's sitting down here, he's looking at everything, and the nurses were attending to her. And then something serious happened. The doctor said, "It looks like the umbilical cord's wrapped around his face. You need to push out now, Wendy. You need to push like you've never pushed before." And Wendy pushed, and I told Wendy, "Baby, you just gotta push." She says, "I'm pushing!" And she was pushing hard as she could, and her face, I never forget how red her face got. It was like a tomato. I swear it was gonna burst. She was pushing so hard, and the doctor was saying, "Come on, honey, you gotta push." And it was really getting urgent, and I was starting to feel a little bit dizzy and faint. And the nurse actually physically, on top of her stomach, this was how dire it was, pushed down on her stomach. And then it happened, all in a rush. when he let out this humongous, ah! And the doctor said, here he comes. And then the nurse said, okay, everything's looking good. And my legs started to give way. And the doctor came out and got the baby. And then there's that moment of silence. What is everybody waiting for? The cry. You want that baby to cry. And so he held the baby and was silent for a minute. And then he started to cry. The doctor said, 10 fingers, 10 toes, looks like we got ourselves a healthy baby. I was standing there and I started to regain my legs and everything was looking great. And the doctor held the baby up and he said, would you like to hold your son, Mr. Reifel? You ever have a time where you really wanted to do something but you weren't quite feeling worthy? That kind of feeling. This is Toastmasters.